Richard Lee Petty, nicknamed the King, is a former NASCAR driver who raced in the strictly stock Grand National era and the NASCAR Winston Cup Series. He is most well known for winning the NASCAR Championship 7 times, winning a record 200 races during his career, winning the Daytona 500 a record 7 times, and winning a record 27 races in the 1967 season alone. In length, reducing the schedule to 30, now 36, races. Statistically, he is the most accomplished driver in the history of the sport and is one of the most respected figures in motorsports as a whole. He also collected a record number of poles and over 700 top 10 finishes in his 1,184 starts, including 513 consecutive starts from 1971 to 1989. Petty was the only driver to ever win in his 500th race start, until Matt Kenseth joined him in 2013. Petty is a member of the inaugural class of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. He was inducted into the Hall in 2010. Petty is a second-generation driver. His father, Lee Petty, won the first Daytona 500 in 1959 and was also a 3-time NASCAR champion. Richard's son Kyle was also a well-known NASCAR driver. Richard's grandson, Adam, was killed in an accident at New Hampshire International Speedway on May 12, 2000, 5 weeks after the death of Lee Petty. Adam's brother Austin works on day-to-day operations of the Victory Junction Gang Camp, a hole-in-the-wall gang camp established by the Pettys after Adam's death. Petty married Linda Owens in 1958. They had 4 children, Kyle Petty, Sharon Petty Farlow, Lisa Petty Luck and Rebecca Petty Moffett. The family resides in Petty's hometown of Level Cross, North Carolina and operates Richard Petty Motorsports. The Richard Petty Museum was formerly in nearby Randleman, North Carolina but moved back to its original location in March 2014. Racing career: Petty was born in Level Cross, North Carolina to Elizabeth and Lee Arnold Petty, also a NASCAR driver, and the older brother of Morris Petty. He began his NASCAR career on July 18, 1958, 16 days after his 21st birthday. His first race was held at CNE Stadium in Toronto, Canada. In 1959, he was named NASCAR Rookie of the Year, after he produced 9 top 10 finishes, including 6 top 5 finishes. The 1960s. In 1960, he finished second in the NASCAR Grand National Points Race. 1963 was his breakout year, winning at tracks like Martinsville and Bridgehampton. In 1964, driving a potent Plymouth with a new Hemi engine, Petty led 184 of the 200 laps to capture his first Daytona 500, en route to 9 victories, earning over $114,000 and his first Grand National Championship. Joining in the Chrysler boycott of NASCAR due to the organizing body's ban of the Hemi engine, Petty spent much of 1965 competing as a drag racer. He crashed his car at the Southeastern Dragway, in Dallas, Georgia, on February 28, 1965, killing a 6-year-old boy, Wayne Dye, and injuring 7 others. Petty, his father Lee, and Chrysler Corporation faced lawsuits totaling more than $1 million. On February 27, 1966, Richard Petty overcame a 2-lap deficit to win his second Daytona 500 when the race was stopped on lap 198 of 200 because of a thunderstorm. This made him the first driver to win the event twice. 1967 was a milestone year. In that year, Petty won 27 of the 48 races he entered, including a record 10 wins in a row. He won his second Grand National Championship. One of the 27 victories was the Southern 500 at Darlington, which would be his only Southern 500 victory. His dominance in this season earned him the nickname King Richard. He had previously been known as the Randleman Rocket. In 1969, Petty switched brands to Ford, due to his belief the Plymouth was not competitive on superspeedways. He wanted the slippery Dodge Daytona but Chrysler executives insisted he stay with Plymouth. He would win 10 races and finish second in points. Won back in 1970 by the sleek new Plymouth Superbird with shark nose and goalpost wing, Petty returned to Plymouth for the 1970 season. This is the car in which Petty is cast in the 2006 Pixar film Cars, in which Richard and Linda Petty had voice roles. The 1970s. On February 14, 1971, Petty won his third Daytona 500, driving a brand new Plymouth Roadrunner and beating teammate, Buddy Baker, by little more than a car length en route to another historic year, making him the first driver to win the event 3 times. He won 20 more races, became the first driver to earn more than $1 million in career earnings, and claimed his third Grand National Championship. At the end of the 1971 season, Chrysler told the Pettys they would no longer receive direct factory funding support, causing the Petty team great concern. In 1972, STP began what would turn into a successful 28-year sponsorship arrangement with Petty, however it marked the end of Petty's famous all-Petty blue paint job. STP at first insisted on an all-STP orangish red color for the cars, but Petty balked, and after an all-night negotiation session the familiar STP orange Petty blue paint scheme was agreed to as a compromise that would find its way to all STP racing operations, most notably Gordon Johncock's 1982 Indianapolis 500 winner. Petty won his 4th Winston Cup Championship, thanks to his 28 top 10 finishes, including 25 top 5 finishes and 8 victories. 1972 was a year of change in other ways, as it was the last year Petty would campaign a Plymouth-based race car. As in the middle of the year Petty debuted and drove a newly built 1972 Dodge Charger in a few races, as Petty believed the car to have a slight aero advantage over the Plymouth body style. On February 18, 1973, in a Driver a Euro unregistered trademark S-Duel, Petty, in a newly built 1973 Dodge Charger outlasted Baker to win his 4th Daytona 500 after Baker's engine gave out with 6 laps left. 1 year later, Petty won the Daytona 450 for the 5th time en route to his 5th Winston Cup Championship. The year 1975 was another historic year for Petty, as he won the World 600 for the first time in his career, one of 13 victories en route to his 6th Winston Cup. The 13 victories is a modern NASCAR record for victories in a season, and was tied in 1998 by Jeff Gordon, although Gordon won 13 out of 33 races, compared to Petty's 13 out of 30 races. In 1976, Petty was involved in one of the most famous finishes in NASCAR history. Petty and David Pearson were racing on the last lap out of Turn 4 in the Daytona 500. As Petty tried to pass Pearson, at the exit of Turn 4, Petty's right rear bumper hit Pearson's left front bumper. Pearson and Petty both spun and hit the front stretch wall. Petty's car came to rest just yards from the finish line, but his engine stalled. Pearson's car had hit the front stretch wall and clipped another car, but his engine was running. Pearson was able to drive his car toward the finish line, while Petty's car would not restart. Pearson passed Petty on the infield grass and won the Daytona 500. Petty was given credit for second place. Oddly, 1978 will stand out as the one year during his prime that Petty did not visit the winner's circle. The Petty Enterprises team could not get the new for 1978 Dodge Magnum to handle properly, even though much time, effort, and faith was spent massaging the cars. Unhappy with the 7 top 5 finishes, Petty climbed out of the Dodge and into a 4-year-old used Chevy Monte Carlo after 17 races. The switch to Chevy did not produce any wins, however, in the remaining 1978 races. Petty would go on to rebound in 1979, winning the NASCAR Championship for the 7th, and last time by 11 points, which was the closest points margin in NASCAR history until 1992. The Twilight Years. Petty won 2 more Daytona 500s in 1979 and 1981. In 1979, he snapped a 45-race drought, winning his 6th Daytona 500, the first to be televised live flag to flag. It would become notorious for a fistfight between competitors following the controversial finish. Petty won the race as the first and second place cars of Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough crashed on the last lap. Petty held off Darrell Iltrep and A.J. Foyt. The race is also regarded as being the genesis of the current surge in NASCAR's popularity. The East Coast was snowed in by a blizzard, giving CBS a captive audience. The win was part of Richard's seventh and last NASCAR Winston Cup Championship. Petty was able to hold off Earnhardt to win the title in 1979. For 1981, NASCAR dictated that all teams had to show up with the new downsized cars of 110 inches wheelbase that Detroit had been building since 1979. Though Petty had been successful with the Chevrolet and Oldsmobile cars he had been running, he wanted to get back to his mopper roots. After taking a phone call from Lee Iacocca, the Petty team built a stunning 1981 Dodge Marauder and took it to Daytona in January 1981 for high-speed tests. Petty's fans were also in a large part fans of his Dodges, so when word got out about the Marauder testing, 15,000 or so showed up on January 17, 1981 at the Daytona Speedway to watch Petty put the Dodge through its paces. Sadly for the fans, the car could do no better than 186 miles per hour, about 8 miles per hour slower than the GM and Ford cars. Petty gave up on returning to Dodge knowing that for the superspeedways the Marauder would not be competitive, and bought a Buick Regal for the Daytona race. In the 1981 Daytona 500, Petty used a fuel only for his last pit stop, with 25 laps to go, to outfox Bobby Allison and grab his seventh and final Daytona 500 win. This win marked a large change in Petty's racing team. Dale Inman, Petty's longtime crew chief, left the team after the Daytona victory. While the 1981 season brought Petty 3 wins, he felt the season was a failure, and the Regals being ill handling and poor in reliability. For 1982 he made the move to the Pontiac Grand Prix, with the promise of substantial factory support from Pontiac. 1982 was a repeat of 1978, and no victories were to be had. At first, the Grand Prix behaved much like the Dodge Magnum of 1978, with handling and speed problems. Toward the end of 1982 things improved with several top 10 finishes, which opened the door to a successful 1983 season with 3 victories, and several top 5 and top 10 finishes. In 1983, he broke his 43-race winless streak from 1982 with a win in the 1983 Carolina 500, barely edging out a young Bill Elliott. After a controversial win at Charlotte in October 1983, Petty left the race team his father founded for the 1984 season. He spent 84 and 85 driving for Mike Cobb before returning to Petty Enterprises in 1986. On July 4, 1984, Petty won his 200th race at the Firecracker 400 at Daytona International Speedway. The race was memorable. On lap 158, Doug Heveron crashed, bringing out the yellow caution flag, essentially turning lap 158 into the last lap as the two drivers battled back to the start-finish line. Petty and Cale Yarborough diced it out on that lap, with Yarborough drafting and taking an early lead before Petty managed to cross the start-finish line only a fender length ahead. President Ronald Reagan was in attendance, the first sitting president to attend a NASCAR race. Reagan celebrated the milestone with Petty and his family in Victory Lane. Petty's last ride, on October 1, 1991, Petty announced he would retire after the 1992 season. Petty's final top 10 finish came at the 1991 Budweiser at the Glen, which was the same race J.D. McDuffie was killed in a fifth-lap accident. Petty chose to run the entire 1992 season, not just selected events as other drivers have done before retirement. His year-long fan appreciation tour took him around the country, participating in special events, awards ceremonies, and fan-related meetings. Racing Champions ran a promotional line of die-cast cars for every race in Petty's farewell tour. In his final year behind the wheel, he had 2 notable races. At the 1992 Pepsi 400 on July 4, Petty qualified second. Before the start of the race, he was honored with a gift ceremony which included a visit from President George H.W. Bush. At the start, Petty led the first 5 laps, but dropped out on lap 84 due to fatigue. Despite the tremendously busy appearance schedule, and mediocre race results, Petty managed to qualify for all 29 races in 1992. On his final visit to each track, Petty would lead the field on the pace lap to salute the fans. Petty's final race was the season-ending Hooters 500 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. The race was notable in that it was the first career start for Jeff Gordon, and it was the second closest points championship in NASCAR history, with 6 drivers mathematically eligible to win the championship. A record 160,000 spectators attended the race, which went down to the final lap with Bill Elliott winning the race, and Alan Kulwicki winning the championship by 10 points over Elliott after Davey Allison dropped out early after a crash. Facing the intense pressure, Petty barely managed to qualify at Atlanta, posting the 39th fastest speed out of 41 cars. He would not have been eligible for the provisional starting position, and had to qualify on speed. On the 94th lap, Petty became tangled up in an accident, and his car caught fire. Petty pulled the car off the track, and climbed out of the burning machine uninjured. His pit crew worked diligently with less than 20 laps to go to get the car running again, and with 2 laps to go, Petty pulled out of the pits and was credited as running at the finish in his final race. He took his final checkered flag finishing in 35th position. After the race, Petty circled the track to salute the fans one final time in his trademark STP Pontiac. The following year, he was back into a race car one more time. On August 18, 1993, NASCAR participated in a tire test at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, in preparations for the 1994 Brickyard 400. Petty drove several laps around the track, and then donated his car to the Speedway's museum. Petty would again step into a race car in 2003 on the week of the final race under the Winston banner at Homestead Miami Speedway and took a solo lap honoring his 7 Winston Cup Championships for Winston's Salute to the Champions. In 2007 at the Pepsi 400 in Daytona, Petty was behind the wheel of a Daytona car during the pace laps, leading the field for the first lap. The field split him and he followed behind the field for one more pace lap before he pulled it in. This was in tribute to Bill France, Jr. Petty as an owner. In later years of his career, Petty developed the career of crew leader Robbie Loomis, who was at the helm of Petty Enterprises as crew chief in the 1990s, and won 3 races the 1996 Checker Auto Parts 500 at Phoenix, the 1997 ACDCO 400 at North Carolina Speedway, both with Bobby Hamilton driving, and the 1999 Goodies Body Paint 500 at Martinsville Speedway, with John Andretti driving. Petty moved to the television broadcast booth for a few seasons immediately following his retirement, but his career in television did not last long. He remained as operating owner until his son Kyle Petty took over day-to-day operations a decade later. However, in 2008, Kyle Petty was released by Petty Enterprises, and due to lack of sponsorship, Petty Enterprises was bought out by Gillett Averna Motorsports. The name was originally going to stay the same, but due to Averna leaving the team, it was renamed Richard Petty Motorsports, despite George Gillett continuing to own the majority of the team. In November 2010, an investment group including Medallion Financial Corporation, Douglas G. Bergeron and Petty, signed an closed sale on racing assets of Richard Petty Motorsports. Andrew M. Merstein, president of Medallion, had been seeking a sports investment since 2008 when he formed a special-purpose acquisition company together with Hank Aaron, a Medallion board member, and others. Sponsorship: Petty promised his mother not to accept alcohol sponsorship. Therefore, he never collected purses for the Bud Pole Award, and competed at the Busch Clash only once, in 1980. His team Petty Enterprises never competed at the Busch Clash. Close calls: of all the races he won, Petty is also remembered for 3 of the many incredible crashes that he survived. In the 1970 Rebel 400 at Darlington, Petty was injured when his Plymouth Roadrunner cut a tire and slammed hard into the wall separating the track from the pit area. The car flipped several times before coming to rest on its side. This accident injured Petty's shoulder, and helped Bobby Isaac to win the 1970 Grand National Championship. During the accident, Petty's head hit the track pavement several times, which led NASCAR to mandate the installation of the Petty-developed safety net that covers the driver's side window. In a 1980 race at Pocono, Petty slammed the turn 2 wall, nearly flipping the car. Petty barely escaped breaking his neck in the wreck and kept his injury hidden from NASCAR officials for the next races, knowing that another wreck could possibly kill him. Such an incident could never happen today, because of modern NASCAR rules requiring an official series medical liaison to clear a driver after a crash. In the 1988 Daytona 500, Petty's crash on lap 106 hurled parts all over the front stretch at the Daytona International Speedway. After several flips, Petty walked away with no serious injuries, except for temporary sight loss due to excessive G-forces. The crash was similar to the accident suffered by Bobby Allison during the 1987 Winston 500 at Talladega Superspeedway and Carl Edwards' 2009 Talladega crash, in that all three cars became airborne after turning sideways, and both cars damaged the spectator fencing. Petty's car became airborne despite the use of the carburetor restrictor plate, which was mandated by NASCAR for races at Talladega Superspeedway and Daytona International Speedway just prior to the start of the 1988 season. Career awards. On May 23, 2010, he was inducted into the first class of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. In 1997, he was inducted into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame. He was named one of NASCAR's 50 greatest drivers in 1998. He was sole stock car representative in the first class inducted in the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in 1989. He was awarded the Medal of Freedom by President George Bush in 1992, the first motorsports athlete ever to be honored with this award. Life after racing. Petty is currently a spokesman for Liberty Medical, Cheerios and GlaxoSmithKline products Nicorette and Goody's headache powder. Petty and his son Carl have lent their talent to host Lifting It Right, a lift safety training DVD produced and distributed by the Automotive Lift Institute. It is used in high school vocational programs and community colleges. He has recorded public service announcements for Saviton International, a non-profit organization of which he is a former member. He is usually seen wearing his trademark sunglasses and a Charlie one-horse cowboy hat, with a large snakeskin hat band and a plume of rooster feathers at the front. In 1996, he was the Republican nominee for North Carolina Secretary of State, but was defeated by State Senator Elaine Marshall in the general election. Petty was mistakenly seen as a shoo-in and his campaigning was sporadic. Following his loss, Petty stated, "If I had known I wasn't going to win, I wouldn't have run." He was cast as the King in Pixar's 2006 animated film Cars as his 1970 Plymouth Superbird with the number 43, with his wife Linda Petty appearing as Mrs. the King. A serial 43s was created with Petty information on the boxes. Races 1, Grand National Winston Cup, 1984 Budweiser 500, Firecracker 400, 1983 Warner W. Hodgdon Carolina 500, Winston 500, Miller High Life 500, 1981 Daytona 500, Northwestern Bank 400, Champion Spark Plug 400, 1980 Northwestern Bank 400, Music City USA 420, 1979 Daytona 500, Virginia 500, Champion Spark Plug 400, CRC Chemicals 500, American 500, Winston Cup Championship, 1977 Carolina 500, Atlanta 500, World 600, Napa 400, Firecracker 400, 1976 Carolina 500, Parolator 500, American 500, 1975 Richmond 500, Southeastern 500, Atlanta 500, Gwynn Staley 400, Virginia 500, World 600, Tuborg 400, Firecracker 400, Champion Spark Plug 400, Delaware 500, Wilkes 400, National 500, Volunteer 500, Winston Cup Championship, 1974 Daytona 500, Carolina 500, Gwynn Staley 400, Music City USA 420, Motor State 360, Dixie 500, Parolator 500, Talladega 500, Capital City 500, Delaware 500, Winston Cup Championship, 1973 Daytona 500, Richmond 500, Gwynn Staley 400, Alamo 500, Capital City 500, Old Dominion 500, 1972 Winston Western 500, Richmond 500, Gwynn Staley 400, Virginia 500, Lone Star 500, Capital City 500, Old Dominion 500, Wilkes 400, Winston Cup Championship, 1971 Daytona 500, Richmond 500, Carolina 500, Hickory 276, Columbia 200, Maryville 200, Gwynn Staley 400, Virginia 500, Asheville 300, Pickens 200, Albany Saratoga 250, Islip 300, Northern 300, Nashville 420, Dixie 500, West Virginia 500, Sandlipper 200, Delaware 500, American 500, Capital City 500, Texas 500, Grand National Championship. There is a disputed win that is not included in the total, the 1971 Myers Brothers 250 Grand American Grand National Combination Race at Bowman Gray Stadium. Bobby Allison in a Grand American car win the race. Petty finished second in a Grand National car, thereby winning the division. Neither driver is officially credited with a Grand National win. Under current rules in combination races, which currently exist in the current K&N Pro Series and Grand American Road Racing Association, teams that finish first in class of teams entered in each series being contested in the same race are each credited with class wins in their divisions. 1970 Carolina 500, Savannah 200, Gwynn Staley 400, Columbia 200, Falstaff 400, Kingsport 100, Albany Saratoga 250, Schaefer 300, East Tennessee 200, Dixie 500, West Virginia 300, Myers Brothers 250, Halifax County 100, Capital City 500, Mason-Dixon 300, Home State 200, Old Dominion 500, Georgia 500, 1969 Georgia 500, Motor Trend 500, Virginia 500, Kingsport 250, Mason-Dixon 300, Maryland 300, Nashville 400, Smoky Mountain 200, Myers Brothers 250, Old Dominion 500, 1968 Race 02, Hickory 250, Greenville 200, Asheville 300, Race 21, Race 22, Pickens 200, Maine 300, Fonda 200, Smoky Mountain 200, Race 37, Capital City 300, Hillsborough 150, Old Dominion 500, Wilkes 400, American 500, 1967 Augusta 300, Fireball 300, Columbia 200, Hickory 250, Virginia 500, Richmond 250, Rebelle 400, Tidewater 250, Macon 300, East Tennessee 200, Carolina 500, Pickens 200, Northern 300, Race 31, Islip 300, Volunteer 500, Nashville 400, Myers Brothers 250, Sandlipper 200, Race 39, Southern 500, Buddy Schumann 250, Capital City 300, Maryland 300, Hillsborough 150, Old Dominion 500, Wilkes 400, Grand National Championship, 1966 Georgia Cracker 300, Daytona 500, Rebelle 400, Tidewater 250, Speedy Maury Lock 200, Fireball 300, Nashville 400, Dixie 400, 1965 Nashville 400, Western North Carolina 500, Buddy Schumann 250, Race 48, 1964 Sunshine 200, Daytona 500, Race 24, Race 29, Music City 200, Race 34, Nashville 400, Mountaineer 500, Race 60, Grand National Championship, 1963 Race 02, Race 08, Race 09, South Boston 400, Virginia 500, Gwynn Staley 400, Columbia 200, Race 24, Race 27, Race 36, Pickens 200, Sandlipper 200, Race 51, South Boston 400, 1962 Gwynn Staley 400, Virginia 500, Pickens 200, Race 39, Race 41, International 200, Race 43, Wilkes 320, 1961 Richmond 200, World 600 Qualifier Number 1, 1960 Race 06, Virginia 500, Race 39, 1959 Rookie of the Year, Daytona 500 Results, Teams, Petty Enterprises 1958 Euro 1983, 1986 Euro 1992, Don Robertson 1970, Mike Curb 1984 Euro 1985, D.K. Ulrich 1986, Movie and TV appearances, in May 2011 he was chosen to say the most famous words in motorsports, "Gentlemen, start your engines for the 2011 STP 400 of the Sprint Cup Series." In 2011, Petty was featured in the show Modern Hot Rod Z. Petty's garage now builds custom cars for the general public, most of which are limited edition. He appeared as himself in the movie Swing Vote, driving in his famous blue number 43 car, and letting Bud drive his car to Air Force One to meet the president. Petty voiced Strip Weathers, also known as the King, in the 2006 Disney Pixar animated movie Cars. His car, the Roadrunner Superbird with distinctive Petty blue tint and number 43, is also the model for the car used in the movie. The King's crash at the end of the movie was also a recreation of Petty's real-life Daytona 500 accident in 1988, with the exception that it was not caused by a deliberate crash as in the movie. The bit which Lightning McQueen assists him to the finish line is based on the 1976 incident, albeit by the pit crew. Petty's wife Linda plays the King's wife, a 1976 Chrysler Town & Country station wagon, in the movie as well. Petty appeared in the 1990 Tom Cruise movie Days of Thunder. He appeared in the 1983 Burt Reynolds movie Stroker Race. Petty appeared as himself in the 1972 movie 43, The Richard Petty Story. In 1989, Petty appeared as himself in the movie Speed Zone, driving in his famous blue number 43 car. In 1967, Richard Petty appeared in the Elvis Presley movie Speedway that was shot and filmed at the Charlotte Motor Speedway in Concord, North Carolina. This movie was released in 1968. References. External links, official website, Richard Petty driver statistics at Racing Reference. Richard Petty gives a tour of Petty Enterprises.